So here we are on the 5th of our payroll videos looking at payments. Right, so the payment of the monthly PAYE. Goodness me, aeroplanes going overhead now, so very noisy. Never mind. Maybe it's EasyJet. They've just started flying from Southend again. Right, so payment of monthly PAYE. You have to pay the amount reported on the FPS that was submitted in the previous tax month. So that, remember, the FPS is the one where you basically tell them what you've paid and what you've deducted, minus any further deductions. Remember, that might be for the employer allowance or statutory maternity pay that you claim on the EPS. So you pay the amount within 14 days of the end of the tax month, which is the 19th, because the end of the tax month is the 5th. So 5 plus 14 gives us the 19th if we're paying by cheque. Now, I can't imagine many people still pay by cheque. Most people are now going to do it electronically. So it's then you have 17 days. So that actually takes you up to the 22nd. So it gives you a little bit longer. And incidentally, employers that have 250 or more employees have to pay electronically. I think most people will now. It's almost not worth mentioning. Another little point there at the bottom, if the average monthly payment is less than £1,500, then an employer can choose to pay quarterly. And the tax quarters sort of fall in line with the end of the tax year. So, you know, you've got the end of the tax year on the 5th of April. So then another 3 months, May, June, July, another 3 months, August, September, October, etc. And all of that information pretty much is given to you in the exam. So month end date for PAYE, the 5th of each month, the payment date, the 22nd of the month if paid electronically, otherwise the 19th, and if the monthly amounts are less than 1,500, then quarterly payments can be made. Need to be aware of something called PAYE settlement agreement. Don't crop up that often, but need to be aware of them. So allows an employer to make one annual payment to cover all their tax and NICs due on, excuse my terminology here, minor stuff, unusual stuff, and impracticable expenses. Oh, I've put expenses and expenses. That's not right, is it? It should be income and expenses. So minor stuff, incentive awards, perhaps subsistence payments. So basically that's you know, if you have a I don't know, a staff suggestion scheme and there's a prize for the best suggestion, then maybe there's some tax due on the person that wins that prize. A subsistence payment, that's if someone's going to travel and they're staying in a hotel and there's sort of an extra allowance to kind of keep them going overnight. Again, if it goes over a particular amount that's allowed, then they might have to pay tax on the excess. So minor stuff. Unusual stuff like relocation expenses. And then we've got our impractical income and expenses. Just looking to see if I made any notes about that. Can't find it in my notes now. Never mind. I.e. things that are hard to place a value on. So in other words, these settlement agreements just have to be aware that it's a one-off annual payment to cover the tax and the NICs. And it's called a settlement agreement because you've agreed it with HMRC. So as you can see here, you would submit it by the 31st of July. So it's only once a year. And then you would make your payment And notice it's a class 1B national insurance contribution on these items by either the 19th or the 22nd of October, depending if you're paying manually or electronically. Right, and again, that information is shown here. So just be aware of what these are. They're just a one-off to cover odd things. I think that's the best way to remember it. We then come on to penalties if we pay late. So we've earlier had a look at penalties for late submission or inaccuracies, and these are now penalties for late payroll payment. Or we also had penalties for failure to keep records. There's quite a lot of penalties floating around, like the World Cup. Late payment of monthly or quarterly payments. The first failure to pay in a tax year does not count as a default. So that's the same as with the filing. Late payment penalties apply to late payments and payments of less than is due. So even if you pay less, you still get the penalty. And here we've got number of defaults in the tax year. And then you can see that a different percentage is then applied to the amount that is late. Additional penalties will apply if a monthly or quarterly amount remains outstanding after 6 months of 5% of the unpaid tax. Or if it's after 12 months, it's a further 5% of the unpaid tax. These additional penalties apply even where only one payment in the tax year is late. So in other words, the first failure doesn't count for this bit, but if it's more than 6 months late, you still get the 5% of the unpaid tax. And then here you've got late payments of amounts due annually or occasionally. So this really relates to those settlement allowances, and you can see you'll just apply these rules. So an example, it's the same example we used in an earlier video. So the employer employs, I've just found that page I was looking for now. An employer employs 15 workers. The tax liability is £4,000 per month. They pay late 6 times in the tax year. So remember, in the previous example, they were filing late 6 times. Now we're paying late 6 times. The first 5 times within 14 days, and the last time they were 8 months late. Right, so the first time they're late, there is no penalty. The next 3 times, so defaults number 1, 2, and 3, which is the second, third, and fourth time that they're late, they didn't pay the £4,000. And if I go back to that previous slide, you can see that for the first 3 defaults, we pay 1%. So it's going to be 1% of the £4,000. There's 3 of them, so that's a total of 120. The last 2 defaults, which will be numbers 4 and 5, because remember the first time it didn't count. So then it goes up to 2%, so £4,000 per month at 2% times 2 months is a total of £160. And then we have the additional penalty for that last one that's more than 6 months late, but less than 12 months late. So the additional penalty is £4,000 at 5%, which is a further £200. So altogether there, we've got £480 of penalty for the late payment. And remember, that's in addition to the penalties for the late filing of the FPS that we saw in an earlier video.